Hi everyone, welcome to After Dark Analysis. Today is going to be part 3 of the Critical Android and I looking at horror movie music choices. Horror is you put things in the right context. Anything's scary. I mean, we've been talking about a lot about children, and children shouldn't be scary. They're the continuation of our species. There's a reason they say women and children first. There's a reason people get so freaking upset over people who hurt children. Not saying that's a bad thing at all. Totally in support of that. But when we reframe them and put them in the horror context, anything's terrifying.
Oh, yeah. And, take, for instance, something like The Omen, speaking of terrifying children. But the theme song to that is Ave Satani, which translates to Hail Satan.
Yes.
And the theme for that is more of a religious choir that's used to carry the melody and the lyric.
Yeah, and religious choirs are also really effective when you put them in the right context. Because It's been a minute since I've seen The Omen, but I'm pretty sure Ave Satanas repeats every time Damien's about ready to do something nasty or creepy.
And having that vocal choir brings out a different kind of sound in that, generally when you have audio that includes vocals in it, it can divert your attention because you have human voice. Normally, you try to avoid that in situations where you're trying to focus on the actors, especially if there's dialogue or something going on, because you want the focus to be on that and not the actual lyric to something. But when it comes to a vocal choir, the voices are used more as instruments than they are a delivery of a lyric. And having that kind of effect in the background is pretty chilling, especially when it comes to a religious sound, because even though, technically a choir and religion is supposed to symbolize things like hope and faith, but churches are also, if God exists, the devil exists, in a sense. Something that we're seeing in The Omen, where you have, Damien being an evil child. Having the religious aspect of it reinforces the kind of good versus evil going on. Hence why the name of the theme is Ave Satani instead of what most people would think of as Ave Maria, Hail Mary, and you have that switch.
Because that perversion and warping of it is, you talk about how choirs should represent hope and all of that, but at the same time, church is representing a very big abstract in a lot of people's lives, which is faith. Of, do you have it, do you not? Is this thing existent or non-existent? Is there an afterlife? Is there this divine being that cares? Is there this terrible divine being that cares? You're dealing with a lot of unknowns, and people can say, my spirit or soul tells me this, and that's great, that's fine, but you can't really prove it.
Right, and that's where, the whole concept of faith exists. Faith is supposed to exist without proof.
And as humans, we like our proof.
Yes, proof is a wonderful thing. But the choir is also used in another soundtrack that I wanted to bring up too, that is incredibly haunting because of its minimalist design, and that's the Candyman soundtrack by Philip Glass.
Yes, that was a gorgeous soundtrack anyway.
Yeah, for those who aren't familiar with Philip Glass, he's known as a composer who deals with minimalist sound. His most famous composition would be for the movie Koyaanisqatsi, a very kind of, if you've gone to a film school or an art school, you're more than likely to have heard of this, or if you're a diehard Simpsons fan, they've made some references to it. But it's just a very haunting soundtrack that's composed primarily around some very unique keyboard styles. And that's mostly what Glass uses for it. The title track, you just have this very deep synth line that just kind of pulsates, and then you have a choir, a very soft choir singing Koyaanisqatsi. And with the Candyman soundtrack, you once again have that very distinct Philip Glass keyboard sound, coupled with only two other real instruments, one of them being a church organ, some piano, and the vocal choir. And the combination of those things brings to life a soundtrack in a really unique way, a startling combination of sounds and instruments that, put into the context of the film, just makes things all the more unsettling because of it.
And it wouldn't surprise me if the deepness that keyboard gets isn't kind of sort of based off Tony Todd's voice, because he played Candyman in this, and he's known for having that very deep bass voice.
Yeah, however, when I met him, he was very nice. Wonderfully nice man.
Yeah, I haven't had the pleasure yet. He's canceled on STC. I'm hoping one day. mimicking his voice with the pianos and fitting it all together, because again, we're dealing with an unknown of, does this legend of Candyman exist? Is he actually the guardian of Cabrini Green, or is he the one destroying Cabrini Green?
Yeah, and because of the way that Glass uses very few instruments in here, each one of them is easily identifiable in the mix. And because of that, you can easily pick them out and kind of focus on them and hear what they add to the music. And with each one of them being as eerie and unsettling as they are, it really does add to that. But you also have like the music box sound and theme that occurs in this too. And once again, that kind of music box sound goes again to the sense of innocence and childhood, where, let's face it, the idea of saying Candyman 3 times or whatnot echoes back to childhood games. This urban legend of Candyman is linked back to that. It's basically just a takeoff of the Bloody Mary legend in a sense, which goes back to childhood and the music box.
Exactly, because we see that, music box theme repeat a lot through horror, but the most recent example I can think of is The Conjuring, because again, not a spoiler, because in the freaking trailer, where you have the mirror and this thing's supposed to go behind you, so again, we have that repetition of not only the music box, but the monster and the mirror. With things that kind of ripple all throughout horror, Texas Chainsaw Massacre has that Polaroid sound of it's ingrained through so many horror films now, and people I don't even think are aware of it anymore. But the sound originated from, in the beginning, when they're in the van, they grab the hitchhiker, he takes the picture and then cuts his hand. So that's when we have that massive shift of, this is a horror film, because before it's just a bunch of people driving in a van, being hot, and going to a music festival. The second that guy cuts his hand, we've made a complete shift.
Yes.
And you know the sound I'm talking about, correct?
I do, but why don't you emulate it?
Is that...
Oh, it sounds just like the movie.
Oh, you want to give it a try?
No, that's why I wanted you to do it.
But we have that, and even though Polaroids have definitely gone out of fashion, I don't even think you can buy them anymore.
I don't know, there was that one guy who did the thing on Twitter where he got the digital Polaroid.
Wait, what?
That one guy who did the Twitter story about the thing that was haunting outside of his door.
Oh, Dear David, yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah, Dear David, and he got the digital Polaroid because, there's a ghost haunting the outside of my apartment, so naturally I thought, this is a good time to buy a Polaroid camera because they're cool.
Yeah, no, I still have one of the Polaroid cameras. I think I have one of the ones right before they went out, but this was old Polaroid, and that's a hefty sound. Older cameras that were kind of that workhorse build.
Oh yeah, the kind of camera you could bludgeon somebody to death with if need be.
Exactly, and I mean, it was perfect considering that's really what happened to these kids after the guy cut his hand. And now, even though we don't have that association with Polaroid, that sound has been such a staple in the horror genre for so long, people just know that means something's going to happen.
Right. One of the things that, when you mention how that Polaroid sound is still commonplace despite it being completely out of its time, something that's happened more recently that's come back, that's very much dated to the 80s, is the synthesizer. And we hear this in a lot of things that now incorporate the genre of what they call synthwave, which is basically more modern, stylized 80s music with current technology. And the first thing that comes to mind that most people would know by this point would be the theme to Stranger Things, which instantly harkens back to that very 80s sound because those synths are so associated with that decade. It's a very, the 80s was a time of technological boom in music where the digital age was coming in, new instrumentation was available for use through new recording technology and production techniques. And so you had a very polished, synthesized sound going, and that was used very heavily in things like B-movies, as well as the music industry itself. So when you think of 80s B-movies, you'll frequently hear a synthesized soundtrack, and that's been able to come back because there's something very inherently eerie about that sound, partially because it's not completely real. It's real sound, but it's not from any organic instrument that we know of, but we still understand it as music. And when it's dark and pulsating, it gives off a certain effect that creates a sense of unease.
This concludes part 3 of our look at music in horror films. Join us next time where we're going to continue talking about synthesizers, but also ironic uses of pop music. As always, if you like what you're seeing, please hit like, comment, subscribe. If you don't like what you're seeing, please leave a comment and let us know. Thank you.